Hey guys, tonight we begin with the sun-baked, olive oil-slicked world of ancient Greece, civilization known for philosophy, democracy, and statues that didn't believe in pants. But beneath the legends of Plato, Sparta, and golden temples lies a much harder truth. And let me know in the comments where you retuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Because while ancient Greece gave us the roots of Western civilization, it also gave its average citizen a daily struggle you'd barely survive today. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Welcome to ancient Greece, where your day begins not with an alarm clock, but with the sun turning your house into a slow-cooking oven. Your home is immodest, one made of sundried mud bricks or rough stone with small windows and no glass. Just wooden shutters to keep out the goats, and maybe some breeze. If the gods are feeling generous, there is no insulation, no ceiling fan, and certainly no such thing as personal space, unless you count the corner where the family. And about as exciting as the dirt it was baked near is called maza, made from ground barley, mixed with water shaped into flat cakes and left to bake either on hot stones or in the ashes of last night. S-fire, think ancient granola bar, but without sweetness, texture, or joy. You might dunk it in watered down wine, because surprise, the water isn't always safe to drink there. No filtration system, no boiling, no brie pitcher in your clay pantry. So instead, everyone from kids to elders gets a cup of foes mixed with water, not for the buzz, but for survival. If you wealthy, maybe you get a fig or two, some olives, or a smudge of goat cheese. Your morning bath usually involves pouring cold water over your, but let's be honest, you not wealthy, you lucky if your bread isn't crawling with yesterday. Flies and doesn't crack a tooth when you bite it. No coffee, no eggs. No fruit bowl, no honey unless you live near a decent beekeeper and know how to bribe them oil, you rub it. And don't expect to sit and relax. Meals are fast, no chairs, no forks, and certainly no mindful eating. You chew, you nod, and you get back to work. And if you a woman, you do and even eat with the men in many households. Women and children eat separately, often after the males are done. So not only is the food bad, you also get to wait your turn to be disappointed. The irony. Ancient Greeks are the same people who gave us symposiums, banquets, and poetic odes to wine, but breakfast that's not worth a line of verse. It's utilitarian, dry often, and then shaving it. Literally, burnt goat doesn't sleep between you and a full day of sun labor and arguing philosophers' bong appetite. Just try not to crack. And there now you rise. Early, not because you're redisciplined, but because it's already too hot to stay horizontal in the summer. The stone walls absorb heat like a sponge, and by sunrise, your little house is radiating it back into your bones in winter. Those same walls turn into a freezer, and you basically wrapped in a sheet, hoping not to become a statue of frostbite. You probably slept on a thin mat or a straw-stuffed mattress, no pillows, just a rolled-up cloak, or maybe your arm. If you lucky, the lice left you alone last night, but probably not. There is no running water, so your morning routine involves either walking to the public fountain, or if you rural hauling water from a nearby well, you carry it in clay jars balanced on your shoulders, while silently praying you don't trip and shatter a week. Worth of back pain on the ground to get clean. You don't bathe in the morning. It's saved for the end of the day. If at all, you might splash your face, rub some olive oil on your skin, then scrape it off with a stridle, a curved metal blade. Think of it as a spa day, but without the spa the day, or any real effect. And don't even think about privacy. Your family lives in the same room. You sleep together, eat together, and argue over who tracked mud in from the street, because the street is also your hallway, your news feed, and your trash dump. You haven't even eaten yet, and already your back hurts you, and that you wrap and pin with a brooch or tie. With a belt, it's not fitted, and it absolutely wasn't designed with windy days in mind, One wrong breeze, and it has not. Re-sweating and your tunic is sticking in places no tunic should. And this is the best part of your day, so you've survived the sweat. Box of a Greek bedroom time to fuel up right. Welcome to train to sprint and wrestle. You're just hoping your pins hold, and no one notices you're comically impractical at worst. You've got two options, a kitten or a mation, and whatever the local market has squished into the roads. Breakfast in ancient Greece, a meal so minimal, it makes modern intermittent fasting look like gluttony. Your first bite of the day. Barley bread, stale dense, and yet you chew through it like a champion, because it is the only thing standing that you've choked down your stale barley brick and a splash of wine water it. It's time to freshen up, or more accurately fail to, because in ancient Greece, hygiene wasn't so much about cleanliness as it was about ritual and oil and soap. That's a fantasy reserved for future centuries. Body at the public fountain or courtyard basin, unless you're lucky enough to live near a bathhouse, which most people don't. There's no shampoo, no minty body wash, and no sponge, unless you stole one from a sponge diver in the Ion instead. You turn to olive oil, into your skin, not to moisturize, but to collect the dirt and sweat. And because dyes are expensive, and no one wants to waste good color on the guy who fixes scrape it off, using a curved bronze blade that leaves you less greasy. But still a little questionable. Imagine slathering yourself in salad dressing off. That's your skincare routine, and if you think that sounds glamorous, just remember, everyone else is doing it too often in communal settings naked. Loudly hygiene is social. In ancient Greece, privacy is not. Now let's talk teeth. There are no toothbrushes, no toothpaste. Maybe you rub your gums with crushed charcoal or rinse with vinegar if you're fancy, but mostly you chew on a twig and hope for the best. Dental hygiene is more about divine mercy than routine care. Body odor. Ubiquitous deodorant doesn't exist, but perfumes do for those who can afford them. So you might dab a little myrrh or rose oil on your neck right before walking. 5 miles in sandals through the Athenian heat, the result a uniquely Greek blend of musk, dust, and desperation. Laundry rare clothes are washed by beating them against stones in the river. If you re-pour, your tunic probably hasn't seen water since last festival season. In short, hygiene in ancient Greece isn't about looking or smelling good. It's about appearing moderately less revolting than yesterday. The oil and scrape method helps, but only so much when you re-sweating in a tunic under a sun that is trying to kill you. So yes, ancient Greece gave us democracy, philosophy, architecture, but a decent shower still waiting. Now that you've oil scraped your way into a new day, it's time to get dressed, and spoiler alert, your ancient Greek wardrobe is minimal at best. Both basically oversized linen rectangles tailored it. Suddenly, your whole philosophical outlook is on display. Forget underwear. It is not a thing, and brass doesn't exist, so unless you Spartan woman wardrobe shifting like a loose curtain. Now let's talk footwear. If you're lucky, you own a pair of leather sandals, if not you're barefoot, and that means a full day of walking on sunbaked stone, goat trodden dirt. Imagine strolling across a skillet in July while dodging donkey dung. That is your daily commute, of course. There is no sun protection, no hats unless you're a farmer or sailor, and no sunscreen, because you live in 450 BCE and science hasn't been invented yet. The iron sun, it doesn't care how philosophical you are. It will roast you by noon. Your shoulders are burned, your feet are filthy, and your linen robe has stuck to you in 4 places that defy geometry. And don't forget, public nudity isn't shocking in Greek society. You might pass men at the gymnasium training in the buff, or even politicians delivering speeches in toas that barely hold together. Now if you're wealthy, your tunic might be dyed, maybe a soft purple or saffron yellow, but most people wear off-white or brown fishnets for a living, so you walk through your day dressed like a toga burrito, sunburned, sweating, and hoping your pin doesn't pop loose in front of the priestess. And the worst part, you're only halfway through your chores. Welcome to ancient Greece, where military service isn't a job. It's your civic duty, your social expectation, and sometimes your one-way ticket to an early grave. If you a free male citizen, especially in Athens or Sparta, congratulations, you automatically a soldier, whether you like it or not. By your teens, you already training with wooden weapons and learning formations in the phalanx that famous Greek battle strategy. Fetch water, bake bread, manage the slaves if your household has any, and raise the children. You the household CEO, but one without pay, respect, or days off your social life. Limited. You do attend plays. You do enjoying the philosophical debates. You not at the gymnasium that tests for naked men. Only you confined mostly to the gosum, the women. Quarters, and your contact with the outside world consists of glimpses through lattice work windows. Education. If you lucky, you might learn to read a bit, but mostly you retrained in domestic duties, philosophy, rhetoric, geometry. That S for the boys. Your job is to marry, well, have sons, and stay invisible while doing it. Marriage happens young, often in your early teens too. A man twice your age, arranged by your father, who treats you more like a trade agreement than a person. Love is optional. Dowries are mandatory. And when you do have children, your primary value becomes your womb. Now Sparta was the exception. Spartan women were famously more liberated. They were educated, exercised in public, and could own property. But before you envy them too much, remember their freedom came from a state-sponsored obsession with warfare and eugenics. Your main job as a Spartan woman, give birth to strong warriors, or face disgrace. And if your husband dies, you can't inherit much. You can't remarry without permission, and your options shrink faster than your social circle. You restuck legally, socially, and often physically. So yes, the Greeks worshipped powerful goddesses Athena, Artemis. Here, but real women, they were expected to stay quiet, stay home, and stay out of sight. That involves standing shoulder to shoulder behind large shields and hoping the guy next to you doesn't trip. In Sparta, boys start military training at age 7 in the brutal AUG system, a program that turns children into warriors by essentially starving, whipping, and isolating them until only the toughest remain. In Athens, things are gentler, but still mandatory. 2 years of training in your late teens, followed by decades of being on call. You do and get to say, I'm more of a thinker, a soldier, whether you like it or not. By your teens, you already training with wooden weapons and learning formations in the phalanx, that famous Greek battle strategy that involves standing shoulder to shoulder behind large shields and hoping the guy next to you doesn't trip. In Sparta, boys start military training at age 7 in the brutal AUG system, a program that turns children into warriors by essentially starving, whipping, and isolating them until only the toughest remain. In Athens, things are gentler, but still mandatory. 2 years of training in your late teens, followed by decades of being on call. You do and get to say, I'm more of a thinker. Even philosophers like Socrates fought in wars, and not with witty comebacks, with actual weapons. And there's always a war, whether it is Sparta versus Athens, Athens versus Persia, Sparta versus literally everyone, or just a neighboring Pelashe. Getting sassy about trade routes. Conflict is a way of life. Peace is just the pause between 2 invasions. Armor, if you can afford it. You get a bronze helmet, breastplate, greaves, a round hop shield, and a spear. If you can't, well, try not to be in the front row. Leather and cloth do'n't stop. Arrows, the worst part. You supply your own gear. That's right, being a soldier is a Bob situation. Bring your own. Bronze. Poorer citizens either beg, borrow, or fight lightly armed, which is Greek for more likely to die first. And when you not fighting, you preparing, training, cleaning weapons, arguing in the assembly about strategy, or rowing warships for hours as part of the Navy. Because yes, those tribes do'n't paddle themselves. There is no veterans' health care, no pensions, no therapy, just scars, limps, and the occasional poorly carved gravestone praising your virtue and courage. If you think life as a man in ancient Greece sounds rough, just wait until you hear about being a woman in most Greek city-states, especially Athens. Women had fewer rights than a pile of decorative urns. You couldn't vote, couldn't hold office, couldn't own land outright, and rarely appeared in public without a male escort. In fact, if people saw you out too often, they might start whispering that you were a courtesan, or worse, a Spartan. Let's start with your daily routine. You wake up before sunrise. To start the chores, you spin wool, weave cloth, grind grain. Ancient Athens is hailed as the birthplace of democracy. And yes, technically that is true. But before you get too excited, let's be clear. You probably would unqualified to participate, in fact, the majority of. But because slavery was so deeply woven into society that it felt as normal as sandals and sunburn, the idea that someone might not own another human being, practically unthinkable slaves. Or unto specific race or ethnicity they came, from conquered lands, Thrians, Scyans, Syrians, and even fellow Greeks from the wrong city-state at the wrong time. Some were born into slavery. Others were prisoners of war. A few were kidnapped and sold. It was a thriving, brutal market, and business was always good if you lived in Athens. Your slave likely did everything: cooked your meals, fetched your water, cleaned your home, cared for your children, carried your shopping, and stood silently during dinner. Some even handled business affairs or managed the household, while the citizen owner lounged at the symposium, sipping diluted wine and debating abstract concepts like justice, irony level maximum. People living in Athens were completely excluded from the democratic process to vote in the Athenian ecclesia. And dying slowly for the sake of coins and civic pride, some slaves were educated. They taught grammar and math, served as scribes, or even managed bank accounts. But make no mistake, they were still property. They could be beaten, branded, sold, or killed on a whim, and had no legal rights. The few who earned freedom, called freedmen, were never truly free. They still owed loyalty to their former masters, and were barred from citizenship. No voting, no land ownership, just the hope of a slightly better tomorrow. And unlike later slave systems, there was no widespread abolitionist movement. Philosophers like Aristotle, yes, that Aristotle justified slavery as natural and necessary. According to him, some people were slaves by nature. Enlightening is ancient. Greece gave us ethics, democracy, and philosophy, but all of it was built on the backs of people who were never allowed to speak, never allowed to vote, and never allowed to matter. Assembly: you had to be maleborn to Athenian parents, a citizen over 18. That means women, foreigners called medics, slaves, and children, who made up nearly 90% of the population, had no political voice whatsoever. That is not democracy for the people. That is democracy for a very specific club of sunburned men in sandals, if you met the criteria. Though you didn't just vote, you were expected to participate constantly. Laws were proposed, debated, and passed in huge assemblies of thousands of citizens. There were no career politicians. Every eligible man was part legislator, part jury member, and part overconfident amateur. You could even be randomly chosen to serve in powerful positions like running the treasury or serving on a jury through a lottery system, which sounds thrilling until you remember there were no qualifications. Your fishmonger might oversee military logistics. One day your uncle, who still believes in sea monsters, might judge a murder trial tomorrow. And if someone got too powerful, too popular, or just annoyed people the wrong way, ostracism. Once a year, citizens could write a name on a broken piece of pottery, an ostrachin, and vote to exile that person for 10 years. No trial, no defense, just go away. You getting too famous. And yet, despite its flaws, Athenian democracy was revolutionary. It gave ordinary men a voice, well, some ordinary men, and laid the groundwork for future political systems. But make no mistake, it wasn't fair. And it wasn't inclusive. If you were a woman, silenced. A foreign-born resident who paid taxes silenced a slave building the Parthenon. Definitely silenced a philosopher who asked too many questions, possibly executed. Democracy was born in ancient Greece, but if you shown up expecting equal rights and inclusive politics, you have been escorted out of the assembly and told to bring your own ostrachin. In ancient Greece, slavery wasn't just accepted, it was expected, even modest. Households had at least one slave, not because the family was wealthy in the silver mines of Lauron. Slaves, including children, labored in horrifying conditions, crawling through narrow shafts in total darkness, inhaling toxic dust. And that's not a footnote. It's the foundation feeling unwell in ancient Greece. That's unfortunate, because unless you live next door to Hippocrates himself, your healthcare plan includes some vague herbs, divine intervention, and a lot of wishful thinking. Medicine in ancient Greece was a quiet mix of tradition, intuition, and trial. There were no hospitals, no clinics, just your home, the wisdom of neighbors, and perhaps the whispered name of Asclepios, the god of healing. If you were lucky, someone knew a bit about remedies. If not, you hoped the gods were in a generous mood. There was no pain relief, no sterilization, only iron tools and silent prayers. Childbirth, too, was dangerous, handled by midwives with bravery and experience. If you were wealthy, you might summon a traveling healer. If not, you relied on the earth's herbs and the patience of your loved ones. Doctors believed in balancing the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, and illness meant those elements had slipped out of harmony. In a way, that's a kind of wisdom modern medicine hasn't forgotten. Fever? Too much blood, let's drain a little. Sadness? A walk by the sea might bring your humors back into line. Garlic, crushed seeds, and warm compresses were all part of the care. Now you wander into the Agra, the bustling heart of the city. Philosophy was as common as figs, and thinkers like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle weren't quiet scholars. They were lively, curious, and sometimes overwhelming. He never wrote anything down, but his questions echoed loud enough for generations. Plato captured his words. Aristotle tutored kings. If you lived in Athens, you didn't just think, you defended your thoughts. And stumble right into a man wearing a cloak, holding no shoes, and asking strangers, "What is justice?" Welcome to philosophy. It's everywhere, and it's not optional. Because in Athens, being too popular could get you kicked out of the city for citizens gathered by the thousands in grand, open-air arenas carved into the hills, the warm breeze brushing against their tunics as the sun moved overhead. The stage became a place where nothing was off limits. Leaders mocked, society questioned, all through wild costumes and clever verses. Even the audience played a role, responding loudly, sometimes with laughter, sometimes with protest. You weren't just watching, you were part of it. Tragedies unfolded with aching sorrow, family curses, forgotten promises. The wrath of gods meant not to entertain, but to invite a shared release of grief. Surgery was rare and frightening. Still, they believed in clean air, in rest, and in balance. So yes, healthcare in ancient Greece, mostly herbs, hope, and hang on. In ancient Greece, theater wasn't just entertainment. It was a civic duty, a religious ritual, and sometimes a full-contact sport for the soul. Attending the theater was an all-day journey for the heart and mind. Then came comedies, biting, strange, full of masks and satire. Actors danced and sang. The chorus echoed your thoughts aloud. And after 3 days of emotional highs and lows, a jury quietly named the winning play. So yes, in the theater, you were never just watching. You were participating and possibly throwing olives. So you've survived your tragic all-day theater binge. In Athens, ideas weren't whispered in libraries. They were debated in the streets. Socrates would stop you mid-step to question your deepest beliefs, not to embarrass you, but to shake the dust off your thoughts. These debates could happen anywhere, at the market, at a feast, beside a fountain. They were bold, energetic, and unfiltered. Even children weren't spared. And through all that questioning, the ancient Greeks gave us the blueprints of logic, science, and ethics, even if it came wrapped in sandals and stubbornness. So yes, philosophy gave us logic, ethics, science, and political theory. But in ancient Greece, it also gave you a headache. a crisis of identity, and a 70% chance of being publicly humiliated by a man in sandals. So you've made it in ancient Athens. You're well-spoken, clever, politically active. People like you may be too much. That's your first mistake. 10 years not arrested, not fined, just gone. This wasn't a conspiracy or a backroom deal. It was built into the system. It was called ostracism, and it was perfectly legal, perfectly public, and perfectly terrifying. Once each year, the citizens of Athens gathered to decide whether someone's influence had grown a little too large. If the vote passed, names were etched on broken bits of pottery ostracia, and if yours appeared often enough, that was it. Perhaps you were too popular, too persuasive, or had simply been the talk of the town one too many times. After 10 years, you returned, your rights untouched, your slate wiped clean. It was democracy's strange way of protecting itself firm, but oddly forgiving. And for all its severity, it worked as a release valve, a peaceful way to cool off ambition before it boiled over. Even beloved war heroes, respected thinkers, and admired leaders could be sent away for a decade, their only fault being too noticeable. 6,000 votes, and you were gently but firmly shown the city gates. There was no crime required, no trial to attend. But this exile wasn't cruel in the way we might imagine. Your land stayed yours. Your family stayed home. Ostracism wasn't about punishment. It was about caution. And even if you returned from the battlefield, the wounds could kill you days later. A wrong word near a sacred grove, a forgotten sacrifice, a god's imagined offense, and suddenly your crops failed or your ship never came back. No antibiotics, no hospitals. Only herbs, prayer, and resilience. Funerals were vital, not just for mourning, but for peace in the afterlife. Without a proper burial, it was believed, a soul would wander forever between the worlds. Athens gave birth to democracy, but it also invented cancel culture 2,500 years ahead of schedule. The plague of Athens arrived without mercy, sweeping through the population, taking thousands, including the very man who documented it. Death didn't wait for old age. It lurked in water jugs, shallow wounds, and the aching silence after a fever. You could be a slave, a general, or a poet, and still die from a moldy fig or an angry mosquito. In ancient Greece, you didn't ask if you were going to die young. You just wondered how soon and how painfully. The gods were powerful, emotional, and easily offended. Would you last a single day in ancient Greece? Right off your face, you were not used to hauling water before breakfast or squatting over a hole in the ground next to a temple goat. You'd miss your running water, your aspirin, and your right to complain without being exiled by pottery shard. They could bless your crops or flatten your village. And since no one could be sure what would please them, people offered often and anxiously. Life expectancy floated somewhere in the 30s, but only if you first survived a childhood where disease, hunger, and poor sanitation loomed over every cradle. Sometimes with wine, sometimes with song, sometimes with something more. The gods were in your stories, your homes, your holidays. Their myths offered answers. Their presence brought purpose. You didn't believe out of love. You believed out of sheer necessity. Forget to honor Apollo properly? Your grandchildren might suffer for it. Hera guarded marriage, but punished the innocent. Athena offered wisdom, but also unexpected transformations into spiders, for example, goat-shaped. There were no modern comforts. A minor infection could bloom into something fatal. Birth was dangerous, especially for women. And while the gods might be asked for help, their responses were as unpredictable as a summer storm. Offend one unknowingly, and misfortune followed. In cities, disease spread quickly through crowded homes and public fountains. War, too, was a constant companion. If you were a man, you likely fought. Even nature conspired against you. And yet, through all that uncertainty, people lived with deep ritual. Death wasn't poetic, it was daily, and it didn't care about your philosophy, your beauty, or your lineage. The Greeks had 12 Olympians, and not a single one of them liked you. Worship in ancient Greece was less about devotion and more about diplomacy. Every act had a ritual, every season a sacrifice. Before planting, before travel, before battles or weddings, you paid respect. Gods held grudges, remembered insults, and often made mortals the targets of their divine drama. Beyond the main gods, there were spirits, nymphs, and strange beings bound to rivers, trees, and stones. But religion wasn't just fear. It gave rhythm to life. You didn't believe in gods out of faith. You believed out of survival instinct. So after everything, the sun-baked homes, the barley-bread breakfasts, the sandal-blistered treks, the wars, plagues, gods, and goat-related traumas, let's ask the question plainly. Honestly, no, you defold before lunch the heat. The diet, the constant threat of war or divine punishment, would wipe that Instagrammable toga fantasy. Among marble statues, brilliant philosophers, and epic poets, but guess what? Those were the 1% of ancient Greece. For everyone else, it was backbreaking labor-limited rights and frequent funerals. Your democracy, only if you re a male citizen, your medicine garlic and hope your gods frequently furious, your social media. A guy yelling in the agora about justice while waving a fish. Still, through all the hardship, the Greeks created wonders. They carved temples that still catch the morning light. They wrote tragedies and comedies so moving that we still perform them 2,000 years later. They pondered the soul, the stars, the shape of justice, and etched the beginnings of everything from geometry to government. They didn't create civilization in moments of peace, but in sweat and struggle, between the funerals and the festivals. Not because life was comfortable, but because meaning mattered more. They argued, built, and questioned with fierce intent, then died young, often, and without warning. And somehow, through all of it, they still managed to leave a mark that echoes in our schools, theaters, and laws. So no, you probably wouldn't make it past your first sunstroke goat bite or unsolicited philosophy lesson in the street. But if you did, if you adapted, endured, and listened closely, you defined yourself standing among some of the most passionate, resilient, and brilliantly flawed people history has ever known. And they wouldn't judge you for struggling. They'd just hand you a tunic, point to the amphui, and say, good, now carry that up a hill. It began with a death and a betrayal. Prasutagus, king of the Iceni tribe, in what is now eastern England, had played the Roman game well. He had walked a tightrope for years, ruling as a client king under the shadow of Rome. He had wealth, autonomy, and peace, so long as he stayed useful to the empire. But when he died, everything changed. His final wish was simple: to protect his daughters. He left his lands to them and to the Roman emperor, hoping that Rome would honor the gesture. They didn't. And if that wasn't enough, they violated her daughters in front of her. This wasn't just a crackdown. It was psychological warfare, the kind meant to break a people as spirit. Instead, Rome descended like a storm. They seized the kingdom, stripped it bare, and claimed it all. Homes, fields, sacred treasures. But it wasn't to the land that set fire to the soul of Britannia. It was what came next. They flogged the queen Boudica in public, not just to humiliate her, but to send a message. You are nothing. But Boudica didn't break. Something deeper ignited within her an unshakable fury. Rome thought it had silenced her. Instead, it gave her a reason to rise. The land stirred with whispers. Other tribes, once quiet, heard what Rome had done and remembered what they had lost. Rome believed these tribes were scattered, disorganized. But now they had something in common: Boudica's voice. What began with Rome violating one queen would soon end with the empire reeling in fear. They had broken a treaty, broken a family, and in doing so, broken the illusion of Roman invincibility in Britannia. Rome assumed she would disappear. But she didn't fade, she transformed. Even Roman historians, rarely kind to their enemies, described her as tall, fierce, with fire-red hair flowing like a banner of war. Her voice, they said, could still a crowd, or stir one. She wasn't just royalty, she became a symbol of resistance. But before she became that, she was a mother with nothing left to lose. Rome had taken nearly everything, but it had left her a weapon: grief. Roman brutality had tried to erase her dignity, her children's future, and her people's pride. But Boudica refused to be a victim. She knew Rome's greatest fear wasn't rebellion, it was unity. And so she moved through the land, not with threats, but with truth. To the Trinovantes once proud, now broken by taxes and chains, she spoke plainly. She reminded them of their ancestors, the Coriol Tovi, the Quonovi, even fragments of the Brigantes, of gods who once protected their forests and their homes. She didn't ask them to hope, she asked them to remember. And they followed her because she did not stand behind her warriors. She rode among her pain, was their pain, her rage theirs too. And others came. They didn't come for promises of comfort. They came for meaning and for vengeance. Boudica offered neither safety nor survival, only the chance to reclaim their names. She didn't promise safety, she promised glory and death with honor, if it came to that. Them, spear in hand, hair loose to the wind, eyes locked on the future. Called out the names of the raped, the enslaved, the executed. She summoned gods like Andress, the Celtic war goddess, as her witness, and her warriors believed her when she said the gods would fight with them. She had no formal military training, no Roman strategy scrolls, but she had something deadlier: righteous. Fury sharpened by betrayal, guided by purpose. And the land itself seemed to this wasn't rebellion. It was resurrection. The queen shift under her command. Rome thought it had broken, was now the spearhead of a movement that would soon make the empire tremble. And she was just getting started. The Roman eagle had long soared over Britannia, but now the winds beneath its wings were changing. Boudica's fury wasn't a wildfire. It was a storm, building with terrifying purpose. And storms need fuel. That fuel came from the thousands of Britons who summoned who had waited years, generations, even for someone to defy the empire. It started speak not in Latin, but in blood and iron. She gave them that voice. With war councils held under sacred groves and moonlit hills. Boudica didn't sit on a throne. She stood in the dirt with her people. She listened to the anger of now. It was time to tribal elders, the sorrow of mothers, the chants of druids who saw omens in the sky. They all spoke of one truth: Rome had pushed too far. Push back. Warriors from the Trinovantes brought spears, slings, and ancient even battle chants. The Iceni added cavalry swift riders with wild hair and war paint, fierce and fearless. Other tribes joined with axes, blades, and torches. Women took up arms, inspired by their queen. This wasn't just an army forming. It was a resurrection of Celtic identity. But Rome had trained legions, professional soldiers, armored, disciplined, and lethal. Boudica had to make up for that with numbers, knowledge of the land, and something Rome could never teach: hatred forged in humiliation. Soon, Boudica's army swelled to tens of thousands. Farmers became warriors. Hunters became assassins. Former Roman slaves and mistreated tribal allies switched sides. These weren't soldiers who fought for pay. They fought for memory, revenge, and the right to raise children to Boudica without chains. She gave a speech, her first of many. Roman historians would later record her words, albeit with their bias. But what echoes through time is clear. She vowed to win or die. There would be no surrender, no submission, no turning back. Then came the first target, Camilo Dunum. Once a British stronghold, now a Roman colony littered with temples, statues, and villas. The Temple of Claudius stood as an insult, a shrine to the emperor who had conquered them. And her warriors, it was not sacred. It was a provocation. And it would be what followed Roman first to fall. The tribes were no longer whispering rebellion. They were marching toward it, armed with fury and led by a queen who refused to kneel. Camulodunum never stood a chance. The once proud Roman colony had become a symbol of everything Boudica's people despised. Its streets echoed not with tribal chants, but with Latin demands. Its buildings rose atop sacred ground. A temple, its roof collapsing in a firestorm that lit the sky for miles. Towering over it all was the Temple of Claudius, a marble mockery built with forced labor, praising the emperor who had subjugated the Britons. To Rome, it was a monument. To Boudica, it was a target. She gave the order. Wasn't a siege, it was an execution. Her army descended like a tidal wave. Settlers, many of them veterans who had bullied and taxed the local tribes, were caught off guard. The city had no proper walls. The few Roman soldiers stationed there were poorly prepared, expecting peace, not war. They tried to hold the temple, barricading themselves inside, believing it could endure a siege. Didn't. Within 2 days, Boudica's forces breached it. The streets ran red, spared no one. Men, women, and children were slaughtered. Boudica's war wasn't just military. It was personal. Her warriors destroyed Roman statues, burned villas, and turned their rage onto the very symbols of occupation. Was set ablaze. Survivors were rare. And the fury wasn't random. It was deliberate. Roman officials sent, these were people who their gods mocked, its citizens dead, and the flame their daughters sold. Her next destination was a city larger, richer. And now did merchants from across the empire filled escape, Boudica didn't stay to celebrate. So she pressed on, knowing that each officials conducted imperial business under tiled roofs. Wealth. Governor Suetonius arrived just ahead of the rebellion. He looked at Londinium, having rushed back from Wales. If Rome hadn't taken her seriously before, they eradicated. The killing he left behind the old, others burned alive in temples. No quarter the sick, warehouses the vae, there was no time. Boudica's forces swept into Londinium like a Camulodunum was the beginning. But it wasn't revenge yet. Not until. Sprawling, defenseless, and made a brutal decision. He abandoned it. Carried Suetonius couldn't tales of horror that there were no walls to scale. Her warriors tore through streets with the rage of no gates to breach. The city was chilled Roman blood. Founded just 17 years earlier, it had grown into a who had seen their homes taken. They were reclaiming what had been stolen with interest. Pleas for help to Governor Suetonius, who was hundreds of miles away in Wales, suppressing another rebellion. But by the time he heard of Camulodunum's fall, it was already ash and smoke, a colony destroyed, of rebellion rising higher. She knew Rome would respond, and hard. Victory bought her momentum. Even more vulnerable, Londinium would now. The empire's beating heart in Britannia felt the fire. Londinium was the jewel of Roman Britannia, thriving hub of trade and administration. Its markets flowed through its streets like water. But as Boudica's army marched ever closer, that wealth turned into panic. With a small force crowded, the Roman legions stationed elsewhere were too far to help. Risk his limited troops in a city that couldn't be defended. So he withdrew, taking with him those who could flee, stubborn, and those too slow to believe a woman-led army could bring down Rome. They would learn otherwise. Thunderclap, open, and she made it bleed. Generations. They didn't loot. They didn't occupy. Was systematic. Roman citizens were dragged from their homes. Entire families were butchered. Some were impaled, was given, and no Roman symbol was spared. Villas were torched, exploded into flame. The rising smoke could be seen from miles away, curling black against the British sky. This wasn't just a slaughter. It was a statement. The message: Rome is not invincible.